So welcome to Belmont University, and we're delighted all of you are here for this very special Insider's View. Michael Jackson, the Epic Years. You know, I don't know, this has never been done at Belmont University, and I don't think it has ever been done anywhere in the country to have the panel that we have assembled here tonight to talk about probably one of the greatest entertainers the world has ever known. That was Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, just to give you a quick few bullet points, was a superstar from the time he was a child, and he spanned 4 decades. Thriller is the largest selling album in music history with 110 million units sold and still counting. It hasn't stopped yet. He's the biggest selling double album ever with History, 21 million units. Biggest selling remix album of all time, Blood on the Dance Floor, 6 million units. He changed music television forever with his breakthrough short films, Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller. His moonwalk on the Motown 25 TV special is one of the all-time most memorable moments in TV history. And there are millions and hundreds of other items I could mention. But Belmont, gentlemen, likes to be known as a school of entrepreneurship. And we have to recognize the fact that Michael Jackson also was an entrepreneur because he bought the Beatles catalog, which was a great entrepreneurial move when he did that. So not only was he a great entertainer, but he was a great businessman as well, and I think we're going to find that out as we go along during the course of the evening. You have the bios on our 4 panelists, but I just want to quickly introduce them. On the far end, Steve Popovich. The 70s and 80s, they say, were the Camelot years for CBS Records, and one of the driving forces behind that success was Steve Popovich, the youngest VP. He headed promotions at the age of 26. He later built the A&R team at Epic Records that launched the careers of several top artists, including Boston, Ted Nugent, Cheap Trick, Tom Jones, and Engelbert Humperdinck. He later left to guide his own company, where Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell, that album sold over 40 million units, one of the biggest success stories in the world of contemporary music. Popovich was the head of A&R Records at Epic, a key member of the team that brought the Jacks, including Michael and Janet, to Epic Records. And it's said without Steve Popovich, that deal would have never happened to bring them to Epic Records. So Steve, we're delighted to have you with us as well. Next to Steve, we have Larry Stessel. He's an extensive career as a senior marketing executive, ultimately leading several major labels and general manager or president. He helped launch the career of several major acts, including Babyface, Gloria Estefan, Celine Dion, and Pearl Jam. Larry was the product manager and the point person for the marketing strategies to launch Thriller, the largest selling album, as we've said, in the history of recorded music. He was the primary marketing contact for Michael at Epic Records through the 80s. In addition, he produced and directed the highly rated CBS television special, Michael Jackson, The Magic Returns. So, Larry, we're delighted to have you with us as well. And next to Larry, we have the Godfather, Frank DiLeo. And there are so many things you could say about Frank. He's had many accomplishments, but it was Frank's strategic promotional plan that yielded the unprecedented 7 top 10 singles that spearheaded Michael Jackson's Thriller to become that all-time best-selling album in global music history. Based on the tremendous success of their friendship, Michael also asked Frank to become his manager, overseeing all professional aspects relating to performance, film, commercials, and music video. He executive produced the full-length movie Moonwalker, and he wrote and executive produced 3 Pepsi commercials, one which was most famous, I guess. And the next, and Pepsi is very popular here on the Belmont campus as well, Frank. I should mention that as well. He also oversaw Jackson's 1984 Victory Tour, the last with his brothers, that grossed $75 million, a record at that time. Later, Frank oversaw Michael's first solo tour in the fall of 1987 that went to 15 countries, 126 performances over a 16-month period. Frank returned as Michael's manager 6 months before his untimely death. Subsequently, Frank served as co-producer of the film This Is It, capturing the infamous final rehearsals. To date, that film has grossed, this is incredible, $265 million. That's an awesome thing. By the way, if you recognize Frank's face, you also may have seen him in Goodfellas, Wayne's World, and New York Undercover. Big Daddy. And next to me is Dan Beck. Dan spent 20 years building the artist roster at Epic Records as head of publicity. He produced and managed as senior vice president of marketing and sales. He spearheaded the marketing strategies for acts like Cyndi Lauper, Pearl Jam, and then here in Nashville, Tammy Wynette, as well as Michael Jackson. By the way, he founded the first publicity department ever for a major label in Nashville, and that was back in 1974 at CBS Records. He product managed Jackson at Epic through Dangerous and History albums. He later he executive produced the Dangerous and History DVDs and Michael's Ghost films. Dan also served as the point person for many media and marketing issues for Michael during the controversies that arose during the early 90s. He also served as a key contributor to the concepts of several of Michael Jackson's short films. Dan Beck, ladies and gentlemen. I'm tired after all that, so I think I'll take a break. And what we're gonna have is something that's rather unique. Rather than me fielding questions, these gentlemen are gonna kind of feed off each other. We're gonna have a conversation. You're looking in on a conversation as if these four gentlemen were sitting in a room talking about Michael Jackson. And we're gonna learn some fascinating things about this incredible, talented individual. So, Frank, I think it'd be appropriate if I can just kick it off with you, Dan, if you don't mind, because I think you were the first person out of this group, maybe other than maybe Steve. Tell me about Michael, when you first met him and your relationship. Yep, I'm talking to you.
Well, actually, I first met Michael, I think, in 1978, 79. I met him at the Century Plaza Hotel in LA. We were doing a promotional meeting there, and Larry Douglas and Stessel took me in to meet him. And I just went back there. I think I was associate director of promotion. And I actually was handling a different brand than Epic. And we chit-chatted and got along pretty good. And then, of course, as time went on, and I got more involved in Epic, we had this little friendship going. And at a certain point, he sent a letter to Walter Yetnikoff saying he only wanted to deal with me. And which Walter would call up, yeah, just do whatever he wants, do whatever he wants. Okay. So I got to hear actually Thriller before anybody else. And I was in his car, not him driving, thank God, because he's a terrible driver. And for a lot of you students, in those days, we used to have cassettes. We didn't have CDs. And he had a Walkman. And so we're sitting in the car, you know, and I'm bopping along and saying, oh, yeah, this is pretty good, you know. So I listened to the whole album, and he said, what'd you think? I said, sounds good, Michael. I said, that sounds really good. You know, when it comes out, we're going to take care of this. Well, what are you going to do? I don't know. You know, I got to hear it more than once. I'll come up with something. And he kept pressing me. So finally, to get out of the car, I said, I'm going to release 2 singles at one time. You can't do that. They'll never let you do that. I said, no, they'll let me do it. Nobody will stop me. I'm going to do it. Just like relax. Just work on finishing it and let's get it out. And that's kind of how our relationship started and went. And I did release 2 singles at one time.
Dan, I'm going to let you kind of be our facilitator here and toss it.
And
but as we get that up.
we'll loop back to Frank, but I think where we want to go first, we're going to go to Steve Popovich. Steve had, in the mid-'70s, had spearheaded the Columbia promotion department. Was magical. They had, everybody was hitting there. But Steve's desire to be close to music and an opportunity to work with artists on a musical basis brought him to Epic and to head the Epic A&R team. And with that, one situation that arose was this whole idea of signing Michael Jackson and really signing the Jacksons. And we'll take it to Steve and let Steve talk a bit about how that all came about.
Yeah, I had been at Columbia Records as the head of promotion from like 69 to 74, and in 74, I went to work with Ron Alexenberg, who was the president of Epic Records at that time, as vice president of A&R. And I'm sure all you guys know what that means. It was signing and developing of new talent and working with the existing roster. That was a magical time to be in the music business. In particular, it was magical to be in promotion and then in A&R, working under people like Ron Alexenberg, a guy named Clive Davis, who is still, as you know, very active in the business. And it was a very creative time, and it was where most of the record companies were run by creative people. Mo Austin at Warner Brothers, Ron and Clive. One day, Ron walks into my office and says, I want you to meet someone. He introduces me to Joe Jackson and Richard Aaron, who were brought in to see Ron about getting a deal for the Jacksons by a promotion man at the time named Pete Bennett. Pete was a fellow who called on all the national radio stations and was a very, very good promotion man. He brought him in, and we sat down, and the ensuing conversation, the result in a couple of hours was the group wanted to leave Motown. Joseph, as they called him at the time, was thought that he wanted to bring them and take them to a whole other level that Motown just couldn't do. I mean, they had that whole run of great hit singles at Motown, but we, at that time, as did Warner Brothers and Capitol, had our own distribution. And we had like 30 branches at the time, maybe 20 branches at that time, with promotion, sales reps. And we had our own worldwide distribution. And most careers we were breaking at that time, we concentrated not only on how to break them in the United States, but we also had a global division, which was a great inducement in getting artists to sign with our label. In a couple of months, we had worked out a deal in a situation where they were very happy. Of course, Motown wasn't happy. And as a matter of fact, eventually sued Epic Records, and I was called into that. I was a witness for CBS. They were CBS at the time, to explain the whole situation with Motown. We signed them after their deal was up. We wanted to use the Jackson 5 name. Motown had registered that, so we had to come up with the Jacksons. The next year, after the signing, and we had a major press conference in New York announcing the signing, we went into their studio in Encino at the house there and did the very first recordings on Epic, which were produced by a guy named Bobby Taylor, who was with Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, who had a number of hits at Motown, and the group felt very comfortable with him. And Michael at that time was just starting to do some writing. I mean, he had had his solo singles at Motown, and we encouraged him to get writing and write with the other members of the group. And the first sessions, I just rediscovered in my storage unit and sent them on to Sony to listen to, and gave them to Frank, actually, because I really feel they're special. I mean, they're unique. They're Michael when he was like 16 years old. Some of the very first songs that he had written with them, and two songs, one by Boz Scaggs, who at one point I took Michael to see at the Roxy Theater in LA and got him with Boz. I thought they were compatible as far as writing together, but Michael on that first session did We're All Alone, the Boz Scaggs song, and then another song that I had recommended was People Gotta Be Free, which the Rascals had, Felix Cavalieri and the Rascals had a hit on. So those were the first sessions we did. We then also went to Gamble and Huff, who were hot with Philly International at the time, some of the greatest records of the 70s with Harold Melvin and the OJs and so on. And I believe they produced the first album. I could be wrong on that, but I think I left in December of '76 to start Cleveland International. And you know, it was the capsulization of the 2 years was there was an album that did come out. It did some business, but certainly nothing like the what eventually happened with not only the career of the Jacksons and then with Michael and then Janet. I remember also meeting with Phil Spector at his house in Los Angeles to do maybe a Phil Spector approach to Randy Jackson and Janet together, you know, which was just a whole crazy story in itself. I mean,
He didn't take a shot.
No, he didn't take a shot, but he had his bodyguard was there. I mean, it's like, who wants to shoot you, Phil? He's got a bodyguard reading the paper on the front steps, you know, making $100 grand a year reading the paper, you know. But it was a very creative time then, and I kind of lost touch after I started Cleveland. And then Frank and I remember speaking to Frank one day when he took over the head of promotion at Epic, and out comes this magnificent, you know, Quincy Jones produced record that was a worldwide phenomenon, you know. And remember, there was no MTV at the time we signed them. You know, they were known internationally, but they were mostly a Vegas act. And Walter Yetnikoff, who was the overall head of CBS, and he says in his book that he thought Ron and I were nuts. I mean, what do you guys want to sign a group with a song singing a song about a dead rat with men? I said, Walter, please. You know, you're new in your job and you're really not qualified to judge this. You know, which you could really say that to your boss in those days and still keep your job, you know, unlike today. But eventually, I mean, it wasn't a real hard sell to Walter. He was like, okay, I'll go along with you guys. You know, you seem to know what you're doing. You did okay in promotion. I'll trust you in A&R. And I don't know what the original deal was, but I mean, it was something like most of our deals at that time were like $150,000 recording funds. And as success came, you know, eventually those funds increased over the second through seventh album. So, and I'm sure in the case of Michael, they increased big time, you know. But I was really pleased to go when I spoke to Frank, and they were touring Europe, and they were doing 8 nights at Wembley Stadium, which is, when you think of it, it's like unbelievable. Here's 70,000 people a night, or 80,000 a night, 7 nights, and I went to 2 of those nights, and everybody was on their feet for the entire show. I mean, it was Michael Mania, and you know, and we talked the other day about is there another Michael Jackson somewhere? I don't know, but I really can't see someone who can become that was a media superstar that you guys all created. You were all involved in that project, and then MTV, and then the international. And then people, a lot of people, when I ran Polygram here, it was Johnny Cash was one of the very few global artists who understood the importance of a global audience. I had Slim Whitman back in Cleveland International. We did 4 albums with him, coming off of this 2 million unit TV album. That's right. You know, and everybody was laughing at him. My mother comes home from work one day. She says, you know what? You got Meatloaf. You need to sign this guy, Slim Whitman. Come on. She said, you know, everybody's got Slim Whitman for President posters up at her shop where she was working, you know. So we signed him. We sold like 400,000 albums, you know.
Well,
so I mean,
Steve, that was, you know, the interesting part of that is that how people were involved in so many different areas of music. And you know, when Michael and the Jacksons were signed, although they had many pop hits, at the time they were still seen as an R&B act. Is that correct?
I think more of a Vegas type act. Really. You know, that was a
Which
little
was
glitzy.
Which was Death at the time.
Death,
you know?
at the time, and I think that they had all these wonderful singles. Those were all pop hits, though. I mean, they were R&B and pop. Those were #1 records. You know, great, wonderful recordings.
Well, all the Motown stuff was.
Motown was like unbelievable.
Motown, you know, there was no black and white in the 60s. It was, whether you're Diana Ross or, you know, Beatles or whatever, Motown was just accepted, and no one really looked at them as black music because they were on both charts. And,
Well, you really hit on it because you could hear a Supreme song,
That's
a
right.
Johnny Cash song, and Cream
Exactly.
on pop radio,
Top 40 radio at the
one
time.
song after the other, and
Yeah.
it was really,
And I think Steve's point about MTV is really important because up until MTV, which started very early 80s, 81, 82, you really were a star based on your music and the song, and then some touring that came afterwards. You know, I was 10 years old when the Beatles arrived in America, and I remember at the time just wanting to meet them or see their concerts, or read about them and listen to their music incessantly. And I never dreamed that I would be involved in this small world of the biggest artists of our lifetimes. I mean, if you look back over the last 50 years of music, there was Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and Michael Jackson as worldwide megastars who will probably be talked about 50, 100 years from now. And no matter how big artists are that a lot of you listen to, or you see on television, or tour, or come play concerts here, or whatever, I think there's a good possibility that we'll never see, back to your question, Eric, we'll never see the mania that surrounded Elvis, the Beatles, and Michael Jackson. I mean, mania, I mean sick mania. I mean, Justin Bieber, I mean, you see this when you watch Entertainment Tonight. You see what happens with Justin Bieber, or you see what happens with some younger artists that are around today, Lady Gaga, whatever. But it's just unimaginable walking or being at Wembley Stadium in London, or Madison Square Garden, New York, or just any arena in the United States, because Frank did the Victory Tour, which was the first first stadium tour after that the Jacksons did. And it was mind-boggling. You had 80,000 people at a baseball or football stadium. You couldn't get tickets for weeks. The scalpers were there. People screaming and crying and dressed like him, and things were going on outside the stadium. People were singing and dancing and moonwalking and dressed up like Michael. It was phenomenal. It was like you've never seen anything like this, and I don't know if we ever will see anything like this.
getting up to that point, you got involved with Michael early on, and did you see that evolving? Did you see in him?
I met
What
Michael.
was from the time now the Jacksons are on board? How did you see that?
I moved
coming
from
up
New York to Los Angeles in 1980, I think, and it was a tail end of Off the Wall. We were on the last single. And I met Michael, but Michael was still very much tied to the Jacksons. There was a lot